Okay, so we'll now get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Tiley, and I'm one of the Agilix project managers. I welcome you to the final Agilix webinar in the series Better Use of the Web, or Making Better Use of the Web. This webinar is entitled Reporting Advanced. Today, I'm joined by Patrick Murray, whose knowledge and expertise and experience make him ideal to deliver this topic. Before I hand over to Patrick, and as usual, I would just make a couple of points of order. The webinar is expected to run for approximately 45 minutes. We have muted all attendees as we're keen to move through the entire content of the webinar in a timely fashion. You can post any questions as per usual in the chat area of the webinar, and we'll spend some time at the end of the session to answer these. If we're out of time, then we'll respond via email. As always, we will be taking a recording of the webinar and we'll make this available to you in the days that follow. Patrick and I will stay on the call for a short time afterwards if anybody wants to speak to us directly. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Patrick, as I know he is the person that you listen to. So Patrick, over to you. I'll just unmute your microphone. You should be able to speak now, Patrick.
Oh, hi there, Rob. Hi, everybody. Can you see me okay?
We can hear you. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, morning, everybody. So, yeah, as Rob said, I'm Patrick Murray. Obviously, I've got the agenda on screen. Hopefully, there's going to be a few interesting slides and a few interesting examples. I think we're going to heavily be looking at examples rather than death by PowerPoint, as they say. So I'll cut to the next slide. So just a wee bit about myself. Some people on the call may know me, some people may not know me. Just a wee bit of background from where I'm from. So my name's Patrick Murray and I'm implementation consultant for Agilix UK. I've been working with Aggresso, UBW ERP, as we're going to be calling it in the next update. Been working with it for 15 years. 8 of those years have been as a consultant with Agilix UK. Obviously, you got my email there, my Twitter handle, and my LinkedIn page, which you can see I'm just another number in LinkedIn. Fantastic. You may be able to tell from my accent I'm Scottish, which can be an issue sometimes in webinars or speaking to people when it's something I'm passionate about. I seem to talk really fast and I've got a bit of an accent apparently. So I have got a post-it note on my screen from my girlfriend telling me to slow down. So hopefully that's not going to be an issue in this webinar. If it is, or you miss something or you want me to explain something again, if we can hold off to maybe the questions at the end, I'm quite happy to go back and revisit things. And as Rob said, we're going to have a recording of this, so something you can play back and look back on. So let's move to the next slide. So the first section is called, it's just a number, and what does that mean? So I'm not going to really go in depth about what these actually mean. I'm sure you've had Unit4 or consultants like myself, or you've heard the 32-bit and 64-bit bandied about and what it is. And again, it's one of these things. It's an IT thing, but it is important when it comes to report engine and using the advanced features. So the first thing I'm going to say is, I'm sure you've heard it before, is ARC. ARC is the old format where you use it for your purchase orders, your statement of accounts, your sales orders, invoices and things like that. So that sort of thing is, ARC is, I wouldn't say dead just now. Unit4 still support it to a point. However, it's slowly but surely getting phased out. So this is where everything is going to 64-bit and ARC won't be supported. So obviously there is a few things where you need to try and get yourself onto 64-bit, and that's where RSQL comes in. That's where that's the prime function of it, to get you on a newer technology, a newer architecture. So I'll just get my slides up here. I'll kind of explain a wee bit of what I think is. As I say, you can Google the difference, and you can go into a rabbit hole. There is a lot of difference, but the main difference I think is with 64-bit, it can address more memory on the server, which really feeds into things like ARC can only access like 4 gigabytes on the server, where the 64-bit can access up to 16 billion gigabytes. So that's quite a significant difference. That leads into you can handle more complex reports. It can use more memory. The kind of image handling is a lot easier when you come to RSQL. So it has got potential to speed up your reports. That's a good thing. We all want our reports running faster. We want our purchase order, statement of accounts running faster. The desktop application is still 32-bit, but the web, if all your users on the web, that's all full 64-bit. 64-bit is obviously a good thing in most cases, but it won't fix a poorly written query. So if you have a SQL query or you have a browser that is slow in general, that doesn't necessarily mean when you convert it to RSQL or put on a 64-bit server queue, it doesn't mean it's going to run faster. It's just it would just be an underlying issue that you'd need to review anyway. So as I say, ARC is getting phased out. It's still there. Unit4 still supported to a point, but it's getting to the point where if there's bugs within it, they won't actually fix it. So I think maybe it's time to kind of start looking at getting everything onto 64-bit queues and converting your files. Again, 64-bit does remove a bottleneck for memory limitations, but it won't fix any massive issues you have with slow running queries. That's something that's a more in-depth look at you need to look at. So not sure if I explained that properly, but as I say, you can Google that and you can go into the rabbit hole if you like. It is quite an interesting subject, but yeah, I'm not going to cover it in depth this one. So if we look at the next one, so this is the kind of show. Come on, PowerPoint. There we go. So this is the kind of show what we're going to cover today. Most of you'll be used to seeing these types of terminology. So get balance, get browser. A new one in there is get information browser. Obviously, that's a new, for anybody on Milestone 7 and above, this is the new way of using browsers on the web rather than the old-fashioned create a browser on the desktop and then publish it to the web. Information browser's the new way for that. I'm going to go over a wee bit of native SQL. So in the case of our one, it's going to be T-SQL, so that's SQL Server rather than Oracle. But again, these will all be brief highlights. I don't want to kind of delve down the experience of the webinar. We're just going to too much technical detail. Then basically data sets extraction. So that's kind of pulling data from another data set. Sounds a bit complicated, but hopefully I've got some examples that show that quite easy. Why would we use data sets? I'll come to that in a second. You can see the asterisk at the bottom, and that's for the information browser. The information browser is really specific to a version within the Unit4 milestone versions. Report engine, I'm currently running the latest report engine that got released maybe about a month or 2 months ago. Information browser will only run on milestone 7.5 plus. So you won't be able to use it. You can still install the latest report engine, but you can't use the information browser. It's not compatible with lower versions. And I think Unit4 are going to be releasing milestone 7.6 update 6 in the next few maybe days or weeks. So you might be able, if you're going to look at that, might be information browser might be something you want to have a play about with. Another thing as well, because of that change they've made, in my experience of playing about with it, the report engine 9.4.6 and above requires the web services and the local copy to be the same. So what that means is, normally you can install the report engine on your local PC, your laptop, and you can connect to an older version of the report engine service, and it would normally work. Some features wouldn't work, but it would normally, for the majority of the time, work. In this case, because of the underlying architecture has been changed, that doesn't harm. The two of them have to be compatible with each other. So it kind of you kind of need the users' computers, if they are using a report engine, to be the same version of what's on the server. Again, I don't think that'd be an issue because most clients and most customers will have that anyway, have the two of them in sync. But it's just to make you aware that you don't want to go down the rabbit hole with installing it, then you come and find out, oh, it's not compatible. But yeah, so I'll kind of speak about that a wee bit later. So what is data set? So a data set, I like to think of data sets as you tell report engine, get me the data from the system, and it puts it in its own little tables. So what's the benefit of that? The benefit is, well, rather than querying the system multiple times, which can be time consuming, especially if you have a large query, you can get the system to get the data once, download it, and then you can query from that data set multiple times within Accelerate or extra or XML, whatever your output is. So I'll show you some examples of data sets and how they work and how they can be a benefit. I'm more keen in using data sets than running Accelerator reports directly from Excel. It has benefits, and it also has drawbacks depending on the user experience. So I'll go to the next slide. So this slide here is basically just going to show some examples of what's possible and what you could use the newer version of Report Engine and where the advanced features come in. I've tried to do some generic examples that might come in useful. Again, there's things like password protection. Some of you may be using that already. You may be using that for your payslips, for example. There is additional parameters in the new Report Engine that make it a wee bit more flexible and a wee bit easier to kind of use. I'm kind of going to show some things like XML. So Report Engine can do a lot of different report types or report outputs. It's just to show you some examples. I won't go into detail with them, but I'll kind of show you what's possible with it. Then we've got obviously CSV files and text files. Then I've got a wee bit on Excel on the web. That's another way of running Accelerator from a browser or an information browser from the web, where the user doesn't have to know Accelerator. You predefine those reports for them. So what I'll do is I'll jump out of this and I'll kind of minimize this. And what we'll do, we've got a nice wee folder. We've got the desktop here. And I'll drag this across. So first thing is we want to look at data extraction. So there's at least 4 to 5 different ways of extracting information from Business World or Unit4 ERP, whatever we want to call it. So I'm just going to quickly go through them and you can see how this works. So my first one is I'm going to log into my Aggresso instance. I've again called it Aggresso. We should be calling it Business World. So if I uncomment this out, and again, I'm sure this may be new to some people, where this is Report Studio. You may be used to maybe Excel. You go in there and you see maybe query balance or a section with SQL in it or something like that. This is a Report Studio where the data will be downloaded, but I'll explain that as we're going through. So if I uncomment this particular one, so as you can see, the naming of them is pretty self-explanatory. The AGR get browser, it looks for a browser within the system with that name and passing in two periods to it. The interesting thing here is you can see there's a wee bit of difference in the language. So rather than saying between or just doing in the old balance tables like here, for example, you would say this period to that period. When it's a browser, it has these new prefix, which in this case is quite self-explanatory. It's greater than or equal to, so GE, and this one is less than or equal to, so the kind of name is. Each kind of parameter or each function you use in the browser has a different prefix. But again, you can set up browsers in the desktop and actually it'll produce them for you. So if I just refresh that data just now, it goes away, it runs my browser. I'm telling it I'm only wanting these periods. Pulls back my data. You can see here it's got me 83 rows. I've got my data in there, and again, it's obviously gave me the columns with the text because my browser has been defined as given me the text as well. And you can see I've got this browser is actually from a balance table, so you can see things like the cut amount, the budget 2, and the forecast. So again, that data will be coming from Planner and General Ledger in general. So again, not a big difference. It's just the terminology and the functions. Report Engine does try to help you. So if I just type in AGR, it will give me all the functions that are available, but it'll give me an example and an explanation what this is. So if I look at my browser one, for example, it'll kind of give me an idea. Give me an idea of what it's expecting. Obviously, having predetermined examples is always a good thing because you may not know. You might not be maybe a report developer that kind of understands it off there, but again, that's where examples from people like myself come in that can help out. So what it is, so that again, just getting a browser, that kind of runs fine. So if I comment that out, and what I'll do, so that was a browser. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring back a query balance, which again gets used in Aggresso just now in the old-fashioned way of doing it. It looks a little bit different because it looks like you're writing SQL code, but it is actually just select these columns from this balance table. Then you have extra parameters in here, like if it was a data warehouse, you put in the the period you wanted, and obviously if you had different languages, you'd put in the client, and that's the language that you want it to come from. Obviously in this case, I've only got one client, and I'm only looking for it in English. You can see here, a wee bit different, the layout, the periods from to, then I'm ordering it by the period, then the customer ID. This is an AR balances. Now if I refresh that, again, does the same. Now you did notice there, it was a lot faster. The benefit, obviously, this is coming off a balance table direct rather than a browser. I think one of the tips I'd say, if you can get your data from balance tables and things like that, even though you could have a browser on a balance table, if you can get it from the balance table direct, it's always going to be faster. A browser has to really run the data and then kind of pass it through to report engine. So it has a wee bit of an overhead, but you just saw there, the other one was a lot slower, a couple of seconds slower, but it's slow nonetheless. You can imagine if you've got hundreds of thousands of rows in this, it all adds up. But as I say, if you refresh it again, pretty fast. It's exactly the same data. I've restricted certain things. I'm not bringing the budget columns and things like that, but effectively it's the same data. I'm just going direct to the balance table rather than use a browser. Now, don't get me wrong, data control doesn't get applied when you use query balance. That's obviously could be an issue for some customers. That's why if you put a browser on it, it works and it applies data control. There is other ways to get around it. Obviously, that's where you write your own little code and stuff like that, but it's not the scope for this webinar. So we've done our browser, our old school browser. We've done a balance table, so comment that out. The next one is the information browser. As I say, this is one of the newer features in Report Engine. So the first thing is you need to know is when you get the information browser, you need to know the ID of that actual information browser. Because you create them in the web, it doesn't naturally tell you the ID of it. So conveniently enough, the Report Engine guys at Unit4 have created a command, and what happens if you run that, it gives you a list of all the information browsers you have access to. Now, my particular one I want to look at is this one here. It's the object, that's the balance table object, and this is the name I gave the actual information browser when I created it. And you can see there, the ID is 47. So it's quite a nice feature that you can find the information pretty fast. Now, if I comment that out, we know it's number 47, and I've got 47 in here. And if I just run that, it'll go away. And again, because it uses a wee bit different technology, it's going to take a wee second to kind of warm itself up, so to speak. Once it does that, it will download, but it should be effectively the same information that I got in the previous one, because the information browser is actually on the balance table. Again, we get 83 rows, and you can see the same information's there. But yeah, as I said, that's one of the new things. Obviously, there is a caveat there that you have to go on a certain milestone version and a certain version of Report Engine, as I said in my slides. So the next kind of output is obviously everybody's favourite, SQL. I'm a bit of a SQL fan when it comes to reporting myself. This is just faster. Report Engine just sends this to the databases, give me this information. So out of all the functions, this one actually should be the fastest. And you can see straight away, bang, it goes in. It's got 85 rows because I've changed a little bit in my SQL when I'm bringing back a wee bit more information. But you can see there, same information, account, my dim values, my budget and things like that. But again, it is always SQL, native SQL is always going to be fastest. However, you don't get things like code and text. You have to then get the text yourself, or it doesn't apply data control. You'd have to construct your own code to do data control. So although it's faster and you can get some really nice complex reports out of it, obviously it has limitations on the actual Unit4 restrictions they put in place to kind of data control and such like. Again, now, the data extraction, you can see here, what this one does, and I need to try to explain this. So we have a query that queries within the report engine itself. So if I uncomment this, you'll see I'm using the keyword RE, and then I'm saying this, and I'm saying query balance. What that is actually doing, if I have to, up here, it's querying this. So what I do is, I tell the report engine will download this data, and then from that data, it queries it. And now the benefit of that is you can have multiple data sets and queries from the one bit of data. So if I show you what that looks like, so if I refresh that, So this is my main query, and it gives me all that information. And then this is the query that's been created from that original data. So if you think about, you have a balance table that has all your information, you download it, then you can have smaller queries off that to create smaller. So you may say, give me an aggregation of the customer age debt. It will do that. And then you could have another one, but it only requires to get that data from the database once. It's not like in the old accelerators where you might have 5 or 6 sections where it's constantly running the same query, but the only difference is how it groups the data. Well, this is more advanced. You get the data once, and then within the reporting, you chop up the data and group it and sort it and do all that fancy stuff that you want to do, but it doesn't have any load on the server. It basically gets it and then it moves on to its own process. That's really good for splitting reports as well. It doesn't need to constantly check the database, and it frees up resources, and obviously the more resources you free up in the server, it can be used for doing other things like posting massive journals through TPS and things like that. So that's as far as that goes. Now, again, this section at the bottom was just a wee bit to show you what's possible. I'm not expecting anybody to know that you understand what this is doing, but this is the kind of level of complexity you can get within Report Engine. And once you understand, like, you can create tables, you can update tables, you can delete data. Now, all this stuff is all done within Report Engine itself. It's not actually deleting data from the database. It's a Report Engine is a one-way thing. It takes the data and never feeds back any information, obviously, except for things like post back in Excel. That's a little bit different. But if we look at this and say, right, well, what it does, it's going to download this data, then it's going to query the data again and create a smaller table. And what this code here does, it actually creates a pivot table on the fly. Now, the only reason I've included this is to show you loopings and execute inserts and updates and things like that. So looks a bit complicated, but effectively the end result is, if I just refresh it, the end result is I go from this query, then I get this query, and then it creates a table, and that table is a nice pivot table, and this is dynamic. It will create extra columns on the fly. So I'm not expecting anybody to use this in the report, but it's to show you the sort of level of complexity that you can get with, and this is quite a simple one. This is a simple, well, once you understand the language, it's quite a simple function to write, but you can see there, obviously you could do this in Excel and do the pivot and that stuff. It was just to show you it can be pretty advanced for this. So as I say, data extraction is obviously the big part. You want to get your data out fast, clean, and effective. There is obviously a number of different ways of doing it, which I've highlighted there. So what I'll do, I'll kind of close off that because I want to kind of show you other stuff. So let's not save that. So I'll quickly go into Excel because I know some users may be using Excel to still get the data. The code structure is a little bit different there. So if I go to this one, get balance on a non-RSQL, and what I mean by non-RSQL, I mean it's not in a report engine file, so that would be a .rerx file. This is maybe if a user is running a report from their computer rather than doing it from the server. This is what you commonly see. Now, the code's a wee bit different, but it's similar to what we just saw in the report editor. I'll not go over it too much, but obviously you define your parameters like period, and that's not to say you don't have to define them here. You could obviously, people like having a control sheet where they control information and things like that. You could have the control sheet and do your lookups. Again, you can use all the Excel functions. Nothing in Report Engine has stopped that from happening. But this one basically just queries a balance table, gets information, and as normal, does all the groupings. One thing I would state is just because the data extraction is different, it doesn't mean any of the functions that you normally use, like your groupings, your crosstab, all that stuff should still work out the box. So effectively, converting your old reports to a newer format should be pretty straightforward. It's just this part in yellow. That's the code that may change. As I say, all this other stuff, you may have maybe some column headers you have to change, but it should be pretty streamlined. The Unit 4 reporting, you guys have done a really good job, I feel, and kind of make this as painless as possible. Now, I've got two examples here. One is that's no prompt, so that just defaults them, passes it through to this, and runs the data. Obviously, you may want to prompt the user. There's a wee bit different. And here, what you do is you put a question mark in. So the question mark goes in, and the word after it you get to assign the name of the parameter you want to give them. So obviously in this case I've wrote period from and period to, but it just means report engine will prompt the user and they type it in and do it. Now, the interesting thing is, as I say, a lot of people will still be using this way of using report engine. This isn't, obviously this is RSQL code, but it's not really a data set inquiry. So for instance, if I went up to report engine and I looked at my options, you can see here it's set to native. You've got native, ASQL and dataset. Native means this will connect to the database and query. A dataset one would actually look for its data from the dataset. Again, where would you use native and where would you use dataset? My view and the general rule of thumb, I think, is if you're running a report from the server, so if you're putting on the menu for somebody to run, I would always use it as a dataset one. I would always use the RSQL container, the RERX containers. Again, it's more advanced, you can do more complex things with it. But if a user is using it from the desktop, say you're downloading some data in one tab and then they're posting a journal back in another, obviously you can use SQL, but if you want to use the get balance, this is the way I would do it. So if you put something on the server for the user to run from the menu, and that could be from the menu from the web and the menu from the desktop, I would look at putting them as a dataset one. If you're running it from your local desktop, yeah, this one is fine, just doing it, having the commands on here. Again, this is obviously a security risk. If you've got a load of SQL here and the user is running it, if they know a wee bit about your system, they could actually change the SQL and get access to maybe account codes, or they could look at maybe you have a payroll information report. Well, because SQL and get balance doesn't apply data control, if it was a SQL one, they could change the code and actually get to see information that you maybe necessarily didn't want them to see. However, if you run it from the server, you can actually put restrictions in here and they can't change the underlying code because they don't have access to the actual template that runs it. But yeah, so it's just kind of say that these old functions in Excel, like load the current sheet, these all still work. You may just want to look at changing the code to make it more compatible. Report engine will run this, but if you ever look at the log after it, it will tell you that it's converted on the fly, and it will tell you that it's the old way is getting phased out, so you may want to convert your report. So there's just a wee note it puts in there. It does it for you. However, I don't know how long Unit4 report engine time will kind of do that, because the whole idea of RSQL and 64-bit and all these things, it's been a number of years that Unit4 have been pushing for this, and they've been supporting it for at least 5 years that I know of. And I get to the point, there's going to be some point they just say, no more, we're moving on now. I'll quickly show you this one. This is just the same idea, but this one is from a browser. So you can see it's in there, query, browser. Again, same code that we had in the report studio. I'm just actually adding in certain parameters, and you can still see the EQ is equal. The GE is greater than, LE is less than. So you come across that. So that's a wee bit different way of thinking. But once you get your head around it, everything's quite self-explanatory. So as I say, that's a way of looking at it. So I'll look at the report splitting. This one, I've created this one without actually going into Aggressor, so I don't need to connect to a browser, I don't need to connect to anything like that. What I've done here, and this again, just to show another example what's possible, is you can create your own tables on the fly within Report Studio that maybe don't exist in the system. So say you had a need to work out some complex calculations, you can actually create a temporary table within the report and then query from that. So if you notice, if I come in here, you can see I'm logged in, but when I run this inquiry, it doesn't actually go and get that data from Aggresso. It just queried itself. It queried its own table. So I create a header and a details table, and then I populate this data within that actual data set, and then a query from it so I can get a list of information. But the purpose of this report was to show you, this is another, I quite like this feature, and I've used it in some customers' reports. So if you can imagine there, you have a purchase order, and you may have different purchase order layouts for maybe different entities, and the different entities say, well, we need our purchase orders to look like this. We need another entity say, well, we need it to look like that. So you have different purchase order layouts. Most of the time you'll kind of do that, and it'll be multiple purchase order templates that have to be scheduled and run. That can be a pain to maintain, especially if a phone number changes. You have to go through all the templates. So what Unit 4 have done, they've kind of took that idea and said, well, there is smarter ways of doing it. So in this example, I have a template called PO_L and PO_P. So what these basically means, this is a landscape. My simple example is this is a landscape view and this is a portrait view. So what it does, when I create my data set, I actually have a column that says layout type, and obviously these two should generate my purchase order as portrait, and this one should generate it as landscape. Now it does that, and it does it on the fly because I've defined what I want. So rather than me kind of yapping on about it, I'll show you how that works. But as I say, the example would be if you had different examples. I know one customer who, when they run theirs, they need their credits to look completely different to what their purchase one does. Now they had the way they did do that is in the old art report, where they had if functions and they had all this complex logic in the script. They would switch stuff, change colours. Well, doing it this way, you just have two distinct templates, and when you change one, it doesn't necessarily impact the other. And so there's things that, but as I say, you could have in, maybe you have 5 entities within your organisation and the one client. You could have a different output for each entity. Now, things like if it's only the logo that changes, you would just query that logo from the document archive. That's easy enough. But if it's a fundamental change and the layout has to be different, you have to have certain logos on it. Now, I think you get the ideas. If it's a completely different looking thing, that's the way of doing it, because obviously in Extra, you don't have scripting as such. It's all functions, and the functions might not meet your existing examples. So if I go into my different layouts, and what I would do, so if I just run this, again, this is running all within Report Studio. I'm not actually going to Aggresso for any of this information. So what we should see is, this runs, and we should start to see like PDF files being generated here. Okay, bring it down. There we go. So it loops through it. So this obviously is the one that maybe you would get in the maintenance of ordered reports. That would be the big P. Anything that didn't get emailed or whatever. So I'm not really caring about that one just now. However, this one, I know that this particular purchase order, a small example purchase, this should be portrait. And there you go. It's give us a nice portrait example. I know from my setup that this one should be landscape. When I open it up, it's landscape. So, and then this one should be portrait. So you can see that it jumps from the different ones. So it's smart enough to say, right, I know this entity, for example, has to have this template used, right? Then it runs it against it. This one has to have this template. This one has to have this template. So you can see there's a nice advanced feature in there that you can change your report on the fly. You don't have to have multiple PO01 variants. You don't have to have multiple templates. Effectively, your multiple templates in the one file, and you just have some smart logic. Now, again, this could be based on an entity, which would normally be a posting attribute, or it could be based on a relation for a particular customer or a particular supplier. A supplier might say, we need all this extra information. Well, you could have a relation on it and just say, well, it's only these sets of suppliers that need them. So you have one here for additional details and one for non-additional details. And that you pull in your relation on your query, and it does it on the fly. Hopefully I've explained that there is benefits in this. I say I have used it a few times for customers, and it just means maintaining this sort of thing. You have one file that you maintain, and that's that one. You don't maintain 3 or 4 different ones. You know exactly where everything is. You have one scheduled job in Aggresso, and it just does it, and it's a lot easier. And to me, I think as an administrator, as a consultant, if I can get away with just having one report that does all my extra functions, I'm happy. So we'll move on to the next one. This one is just an example of, there's a few extra features in this one as well. We have, again, some people may be using passwords just now. This is just a wee example to show you that there's some extra advanced features in it. So you can see I've got multiple password parameters here. These ones are probably the ones where people are most commonly. There is this one, but there is extra features in it. So again, like before, I'm just going to refresh this data. This data isn't coming from any Aggresso system. I've just mocked up some information, some data. So what this one will do is it will generate it will split the PDF files and it will give the password, and I've just made the password, make it the Resno ID. Obviously, you dictate what the password would be. You would have a column in your data set. Normally, I would say to customers, they're going to do that, say something like the first 4 characters of national insurance number and the last 4 characters of their maybe the second name, for example, and then do it that way. Something only they possibly would know. In the case of this, just to make it easier, I've just said I want the split files to have passwords of the person's Resno ID. However, the large file that may be sitting the maintenance of ordered reports, just give it the password Patrick. Now, in older versions, when you use ARC, if you put the password on it, it would assign the passwords. However, it would actually, you wouldn't know what password it had assigned, so you couldn't really have a PDF file in there. But if I show you what I mean this, so if I go to my passwords, and if we just run this, as I say, I'm not going to get any great detail with this. So again, like the other one, it will split the files out, and then we'll get the large file with all the pay slips on it, for example. Yeah, so for example, this one here is, if I open up this one, I know the Resno for this particular payslip is AGX1. AGX1, it puts the password on AGX1, brilliant, and AGX3 for this one. So you see the individual PDF files, and obviously you can put these in the document archive. These open up, no problem. However, the one that was set in the maintenance of order reports, this will have a different password. So this password is obviously Patrick, because that's what I defined it as. So it just means that your payroll people or HR people don't need to know a certain, you can specify a password that only they know. Now, again, the drawback is it has to be in the report variant itself and pass through to it. However, another wee advanced feature, you could have that set up as a system parameter, then have your code query the system parameter to get that information. So it's hidden away and it's tied down to maybe only the systems administrator can get access to that password, or you put it somewhere that only payroll get access to it and they can change it whenever they need to change it. They may want to change it on a monthly basis, for example. So again, it was just to show you those 2 features that have been enhanced where the passwords are involved. We were conscious of time, so I'll try to speed stuff up here. I'll run through these ones quite quick because I'd like to show you something on the web. So another feature that Unit4 have provided with for us is we can now do different outputs. Obviously, I've got an XML example. You may have an interface where you need to send a list of suppliers to another system and they accept XML. Well, if they expect XML, rather than doing some custom work where you need to get a consultancy firm in and do all this fancy stuff, you can actually have it done within the report engine itself. So again, I'm just creating some information, and within here, this obviously would come direct from your Unit4 system. So if I just refresh the data, oh sorry, this one does go into it because I need to get the client ID for it. So if I load that, it gets me all the data, does my data structure. Now I'll quickly show you this. It's no in depth. I'm not going to really go into detail. However, anybody that knows anything about XML style sheets and stuff like that will kind of understand what this is doing. It's effectively just it's telling how to build the XML and then taking my values from my data set. And how that works is if I go into here and I just run this, you can see it's built it there. However, I want to see the one that's my output. And I can see supplier, I've put the end name on it, open this up in XML, it creates my XML file, and again you can have the wee groupings and such like. So again, this was just to show you that the report engine has moved on. It allows you to do these kind of interface type things now, where you can pass XML rather than just text files from Microsoft, or you don't need custom code from developers to kind of do this. As long as you've maybe got somebody in your IT, or if it's yourself that understands XML style sheets, and again, the internet is full of these sort of resources, you can always build it, get your data set, and actually create this. And again, there's other functions in there, but I'm not going to go into detail with them. So that's just show you that it can do more than just Excel and PDF files. Now I'll quickly show you this text file one. Again, I'm sure people have already kind of played about with this. It can also do text files, which, well, that's fine. You have text files for your backs and stuff like that. However, if the backs files that most customers will have are ARWs, ARW is an older technology. At some point, I believe Unit4 will replace that as well. I'm sure it'll be around for a while. However, you may have other interfaces. Or I do a lot of work for universities, and they have things like they need to send files to WPM in a certain format, and that has to be comma separated, pipe separated, blah, 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 blah. There is always a different format. Well, Report Engine lets you do that, and it lets you do it pretty easily. So again, get my data, and if I just run my report, it's generated a text file here, but I've basically, one of the nice parameters in the new Report Engine is you can actually specify the extension. So I've made the extension like .33 because that was my pretend order number. My pretend order number was 33. However, in other cases, and I've been playing about with this recently, if you have things like the absence module or you have things like that, once, or even if you have like HR and you have where maybe somebody's probational period is coming up and you want to send an email to the line manager because you've set something up in the system to monitor it, you could have this sort of set up to say, construct a calendar invite and give it the extension ICS. It's kind of, if I go back here, I'm not going to really run it, but in this example here, you could say ICS, and what that would do is create an online calendar. So you email them, say, hi, so-and-so probational period is coming up, please have a meeting with them and review such and such, and attached to it would be a calendar invite, and obviously if they double click on that, you've suggested a date, maybe on the day their actual review is required. They double click on that, it goes into their calendar where they do that. So it just does extra functions, and as I say, being able to control the extension of these text files can be pretty powerful, and it was something that was put in the latest Report Engine. It was kind of customers and consultants that asked for it because it can be powerful. Right, I know we're getting a bit conscious in time, but what I'd like to do is jump into my web and kind of show you some nice features what you may or may not be using, but I think it could be helpful for especially users and with everything going to the web, having users actually getting Excel data out and actually, again, this is one of the common questions. Well, how do I get this out in the Excel? Because obviously everybody loves Excel. So if I just log in quickly and show you this. And hopefully my demo system isn't too slow. Right, so we're in. So if I go to an old style browser, for example, if I come into my old style browser and I say I've got AR data and I open up my AR open items. So in this particular report, what it is, it's just a download of all the open items in the AR module. It is only looking for, you can see here, it's only looking for B status ones, so that's open items, so that's effectively your debt that is outstanding. In this particular browser, I've actually just put in a date column, so how many days are overdue. So normally that's fine. However, you want to have an age debt, but you don't want the user to have to run an accelerator report from the menu and then go to maintenance of old reports. That seems a bit cumbersome. So what you can do is they can run the data from a browser and they can filter it however they want. That creates a data set. Then we have the export button. Now the export, I'm sure this maybe got brought up in some of our other webinars, but it's just to kind of give you an idea. So in here we have the report engine, we have all these extra functions, but the one I'm going to look at just now, we have an age date Excel report. Now what that is, that's effectively an RERX file that I've generated. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is we have one data set here. This browser has one data set, but if I open up my Excel sheet, what it does, it basically runs Accelerator on the back, so the user doesn't need Accelerator installed on their PC. So now if I open this up, we get a nice report. Now, I've done a couple of sheets on this. I've just said, yeah, here's my raw data set. So here's everything that was in the browser, as the user saw on the screen. But then here's an actual other tab that says, and here's an age debt. Here's a breakdown of how many days that this debt is outstanding. And this is dynamic. This will change based on whatever the user brings back in the browser. And then you can see there's another age date, just a different way of looking at it, where still an age date, but I'm kind of showing the invoice number and the due dates. So you can imagine you can have a kind of a subset of reports, and all these different reports came from that one browser. Again, these are, if you're a report writer, these are pretty easy to do because Aggresso does all the hard work for you. You don't need to know any coding. So if I just open that up, it creates the RERX and it creates the data set. And all you have to do once you're in here, you can say, yep, there's my data, and you can create Excel, even create a Word data if you wanted, create a PDF file. You create it, do your layout, do all that nice fancy stuff you want, save it, and then just import it back in to this particular part of the report engine. Once it's in there, the user can run it. So they say, I want an age date for this one particular customer. They don't have to go back to AR or have a nice fancy Accelerator setup where they have to go different parts of the system. They just run a browser and they click, give me this as an age date report, and it pulls that data out for them. As I say, this is dynamic. The report's dynamic. It changes based on whatever the user filters in here. Now, that's one. I've got an information browser one as well. These look a wee bit different, but the fundamentals are the same. So when I went to the export here, it had a kind of old style looking drop down. When I come to the information browser, when it eventually starts, the export button is a little bit different. My view is it's a little bit nicer, if I'm being honest. When I click on that, I have predetermined ones, so these are just now. They can put it into a browser, it will just dump the data out, but they have custom as well, and that custom would just be where you would do your age date formats and things like that. So it looks a wee bit different, but effectively the two of them are the same function. So yeah, it was just to show on the web you can run Accelerator, and that Accelerator can actually be, you can do it, but you don't really need to know any coding. It's just more, you just do the layout for them. You don't need to write RSQL. Aggresso does the data set itself. I have two other things, and I think I should be able to get them within the timescale. If I just show you this just now, the if and the loops, this is a pretty complex one, but this was to show you the sort of level you can get complexity with RSQL. This is a report that looks at absences, and I'm doing a lot of information on it. So this is one I've done recently for a customer where you can have multiple queries, but then it can do if statements. If this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. It gets data, and what that if statement done, it's creating here. Anybody that knows anything about SQL, it creates dynamic SQL. So it says if the report mode is that, I want you to do this. If it's this, do this. That's super powerful. That means you don't have to have multiple queries. You can manipulate how the query runs, what parameters are passed into it, how the output is, and it's all done based on other parameters being set. Again, maybe not anybody that's not used it, so it is super powerful, and it can make anybody that knows anything about dynamic SQL, this is a really useful thing. And then just, it was another example, looping over, getting other information, blah, 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 and then it goes in there and you can delete stuff where the user and stuff like that. But it was just to show you that's not the most advanced you can be, but it's getting up there where you can make decisions and change how your code runs. So that's the second last one. The last one I would say is this one here. I found this really useful in Report Engine. With the advent of Report Engine and being able to do all this fancy stuff, for this example would be a purchase order. You can actually make branded emails within Report Engine and send it out with your purchase order. So your purchase order emails could actually look, I'm not saying, may not be the nicest looking thing, but you could actually have a branded email sent to a supplier where it has information in it that could be useful, because let's be honest about it, sometimes people actually they don't look at certain things on the PDF file, but at least you can say it's in the email. You can give them the purchase order straight away, and sometimes you might have a supplier that replies to you and you don't know what purchase order they're talking about or whatever. Well, if they just reply to you or forward you on this email, you have all the information you kind of or you like from it. So yeah, it just shows that sort of stuff. That's the level what Report Engine get to now. There is no, I don't particularly think there's any limits to what you can do in it. I feel every time there's a new version, there's always something new that Unit4 have added. It's getting more powerful, and to be honest with you, I'd encourage you to go in there if you want to get in contact with ourselves to kind of show you more examples and some of the reports, maybe you're having an issue with getting a particular report out, I'm happy to help with that. But as I say, I don't see any limitations in what I can do in that report engine now, and I'm sure the more you play with it, the more you'll see the benefits here. One thing I'll just add, and I know I'm taking up time and people are probably getting bored, but one thing I'd mention as well, see if you're in desktop, and especially for cloud customers, you may not have Report Engine installed. You can actually get Report Engine from the Report Architect. If you open this up, it will actually open up the Report Studio. So just in case you want to play about with, but you're a cloud customer and your laptop doesn't have, maybe it doesn't have Report Engine installed, you can still get access to, if you have access to these menu items, you can go in there and do that. So it's just another way of getting access to it without actually having Report Engine installed on your PC. So I think that might be me just about to wrap up what I'm saying. So I'll pass that back to Rob if he wants to kind of jump back on.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Patrick, for that. That was great. We will move on to questions. I'm just going to stop the recordings before we do, but I'll also ask Sam to drop into the chat the feedback form. Ask you to fill in. Just going to stop the recordings now.